What happens when a woman books a luxury hotel suite only to be treated like she doesn't belong the moment she walks through the door? As tensions rise, an unexpected twist leaves the entire staff speechless. Let us know in the comment section below. Have you ever faced discrimination like this? The lobby of the Kensington Grand Hotel gleamed under the chandelier lights, its marble floors polished to perfection, its high ceilings exuding an air of exclusivity. Olivia Carter walked in with a quiet confidence, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, each step commanding attention. She was here on business, not pleasure. A meeting that could make or break her latest case was scheduled to take place in one of the hotel's private suites, a space she had reserved well in advance. She strode toward the front desk, her overnight bag hanging from her shoulder. The line wasn't long, only a few guests ahead of her, but it was enough for her to notice the way the concierge greeted each one. Warm smiles, polite nods, and eagerness to serve. When it was finally her turn, she set her ID and reservation details on the counter, waiting for the same treatment. But it never came. The concierge, a tall, thin man with slick-back blonde hair and a navy blue uniform, barely glanced at her. His name tag read Ethan, and his expression, initially neutral, shifted the moment he took in her presence. Olivia could see it, an almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. She had seen that look before. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, but his voice lacked the warmth she had just heard him use with the guest before her. He didn't even reach for her ID. "How can I help you?" Olivia arched a brow. "I have a reservation under the name Olivia Carter, Executive Suite." Ethan blinked at her, then let out a short, dismissive chuckle. "Are you sure? The executive suites are quite high-end." The unspoken meaning was clear. She kept her face composed, her lawyer instincts taking over. "I'm sure," she replied smoothly. "It's been booked for over a month." Ethan exhaled through his nose, his fingers finally moving over the keyboard. Olivia tapped her nails lightly against the counter, watching as he scrolled through the system. "I don't see anything under that name," he said after a few seconds. "Maybe you booked the wrong hotel?" Olivia's patience thinned. She knew exactly where she had booked, and she knew this was no mistake. "Check again," she said. "I have the confirmation email if that helps." Ethan's lips twitched. "That won't be necessary, ma'am. But as I said, there's no reservation under—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes freezing on the screen. Olivia noticed the slight tensing of his jaw. He had found it. She tilted her head. "You were saying?" For a brief second, he hesitated, as if debating whether to admit the truth, but instead of an apology, he simply cleared his throat and forced a stiff smile. "Ah, here it is. Apologies for the delay." Ethan turned, grabbing a keycard, but his fingers lingered over the selection of rooms behind the desk. Olivia caught the flicker of hesitation before he plucked a different keycard from the row. She didn't miss a thing. He handed it over with a forced grin. "Room 14. Enjoy your stay." Olivia didn't move. She reached for the keycard but glanced at the tag attached to it, 104, not the suite she had booked. "This isn't my room," she said, keeping her tone steady. Ethan's smile remained, but his gaze hardened. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there was a last-minute maintenance issue with your original suite. This is the best we can do for the night." Olivia leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice just enough to make him uneasy. "Interesting, because I called earlier today to confirm, and there were no issues then." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had been caught, and they both knew it. "I can assure you this is a lovely room," he said, trying to recover. Olivia studied him, the way his hand stayed rested on the counter, as if grounding himself. The way his gaze flickered slightly toward his supervisor in the background, a woman who had been watching but had chosen not to intervene. "I'll wait for the manager," Olivia said simply. Ethan's eyes flashed with something sharp. Annoyance, maybe even panic. The manager is currently unavailable." "Then I'll wait," she said, crossing her arms. A few murmurs from the guests behind her began to rise. People were watching now. The tension had shifted. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose and turned toward the office in the back. Olivia didn't move. She had been in situations like this before. She had faced microaggressions wrapped in fake politeness, subtle racism disguised as misunderstandings. This wasn't new. A few moments later, a man in his 50s emerged, his suit crisp, his badge reading Michael Sterling, General Manager. He smiled as he approached. "Ms. Carter, is there a problem?" Olivia kept her voice measured. "Apparently my executive suite had a maintenance issue that wasn't mentioned earlier today when I confirmed my booking." She held up the key card. "And I was given this instead." Michael's eyes flickered toward Ethan, who immediately looked away. "Let me check that for you," Michael said, stepping behind the desk. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, his brows knitting together as he read the screen. Olivia could tell the moment he realized the truth. His posture straightened. His lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came out. Olivia let the silence stretch. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. "It appears your original suite is indeed available. I sincerely apologize for the confusion." He cut a sharp glance at Ethan, who was suddenly very interested in the paperwork in front of him. Michael handed Olivia a new keycard. "Penthouse suite. As per your booking, please allow us to send a complimentary bottle of wine and dinner to your room, on the house." Olivia accepted the keycard without breaking eye contact. "I appreciate that." As she turned to walk away, she didn't miss the way Ethan's face burned red, his jaw clenched tight. She knew what had just happened. He had tried to play gatekeeper. He had tried to humiliate her, to subtly push her out. But she had put him in his place without raising her voice once. What Ethan didn't know, what he had yet to realize, was that this was only the beginning. Because the next morning, when he found out who she really was, he wouldn't just be embarrassed. He would be terrified. And Olivia couldn't wait. Olivia woke up the next morning to the soft hum of the city outside her penthouse suite. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the plush, king-sized bed. She stretched, inhaling deeply. Today was going to be interesting. She had a breakfast meeting at 9 a.m. with her client, a high-profitable real estate mogul whose lawsuit could cost the Kensington Grand Hotel millions. And after last night's little incident at check-in, she was more than ready to walk into that meeting with her head held high. After a quick shower, she dressed sharply in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, pairing it with simple diamond studs and black stilettos. As a black woman in high-powered law, Olivia had learned early on that confidence was a language all its own. By the time she exited the elevator and stepped into the grand dining area of the hotel's restaurant, heads were already turning. She didn't have to look for Ethan. She felt his stare before she even spotted him. Behind the concierge desk, Ethan stood rigid, his face paler than it had been last night. His usual air of smug superiority had been replaced with something else. Unease, confusion, a creeping sense of dread. Because standing just a few feet from Olivia, waiting by a private table, was Mr. Henry Whitmore, the hotel's owner, and he was smiling at her. Ethan's jaw clenched so tightly Olivia could practically hear his teeth grinding. "Ah, Olivia, right on time," Whitmore said, extending a hand. He was an older gentleman, mid-60s, with salt and pepper hair and a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people's rent. "It's great to finally meet in person." Olivia smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Likewise. Thank you for having me." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan struggling to maintain his composure. He was watching their interaction closely, trying to piece together what was happening, but Olivia could already see the wheels turning in his head. Something wasn't adding up. Why was she meeting with the owner of the hotel? She could almost hear his thoughts scrambling for an explanation. Maybe she knows him socially? No, that doesn't explain the business tone of their conversation. A friend of a friend? A relative? But the real answer was so much worse for him. As they sat down, a waiter immediately approached to pour coffee. Olivia took a sip, then pulled a neatly printed folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Whitmore skimmed through it, nodding. I read over the preliminary filings. Your legal team is solid, Olivia. I knew hiring you was the right call. Hiring you. There it was. The words that sent a chill straight through Ethan's spine. His head snapped up, his hands clenched into fists. Olivia Carter wasn't just a guest. She wasn't some random black woman he could push aside. She was Henry Whitmore's attorney, the lawyer representing the very lawsuit that could bury this hotel if handled incorrectly. The weight of that realization hit him like a freight train. Across the room, Olivia could feel his gaze burning into her back, but she didn't turn. Instead, she continued the conversation with Whitmore, effortlessly navigating legal jargon and high-stakes negotiations as if it were second nature. Because it was. We're looking at a strong case for liability, she continued, tapping a highlighted section in the document. The settlement terms I outlined are fair, but I have no doubt the opposing counsel will push back. The question is, how aggressive do you want me to be? Whitmore chuckled, sipping his coffee. Oh, I trust your instincts, Olivia. That's why I hired you. Just make sure we come out on top. Always. Whitmore leaned back, clearly pleased. Good. Now, I assume your stay has been comfortable? Finally, Olivia turned slightly in her chair, letting her eyes drift toward Ethan just long enough to see his expression. He was seething. Actually, she began, drawing out the word just enough to make Whitmore's brow lift. There was a minor issue when I checked in last night. Whitmore's demeanor shifted. Oh. Ethan stiffened, his hands now gripping the counter, as if bracing for impact. Olivia let the silence stretch for just a moment before continuing, her voice calm and deliberate. Your concierge here seemed to believe I didn't belong in the executive suites. Whitmore blinked. Excuse me? Olivia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He conveniently couldn't find my reservation at first, and then, when he did, he insisted my suite was unavailable and tried to place me in a lesser room instead. She paused, then added, It wasn't until I refused to be dismissed that he miraculously found an opening in my original booking. Whitmore's entire expression darkened. The businessman in him knew what this meant. A discrimination claim, a PR disaster. And worst of all, Olivia Carter, a powerful black attorney with an undefeated record, had witnessed it firsthand. Slowly, Whitmore turned in his seat to face Ethan, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Ethan, Whitmore said, his voice dangerously level, is that true? Ethan swallowed, but no words came. There was confusion with the system, and I don't care about excuses. Whitmore's tone cut through Ethan's stumbling defense like a blade. I care about results, and right now what I see is my lawyer, one of the top attorneys in the country, telling me you tried to undermine her. That's not confusion, that's negligence. Ethan's face burned red. He opened his mouth again, but Whitmore raised a hand. Save it, I don't have time for incompetence. He motioned toward the back office. You're dismissed. The words hit like a gunshot. Ethan's entire posture caved in on itself. His lips parted in disbelief, but Whitmore was already turning back to Olivia, dismissing him like he was nothing. Like he was the one who didn't belong. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, frozen. His mind reeled. He had spent years working his way up in this hotel. He had climbed from bellboy to concierge, believing himself untouchable. And no, one miscalculation had unraveled everything. One assumption. One black woman he had thought was beneath him. And just like that, his career was over. As he turned stiffly and walked toward the back office, Olivia allowed herself a quiet breath of satisfaction. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded anything. She had simply existed in a space he had tried to keep her out of, and that had been enough to bring his entire world crashing down. Whitmore sighed, rubbing his temples. Olivia, I can't apologize enough for that. I'll have my team review all hiring policies moving forward. I appreciate that, Olivia said smoothly. Whitmore signaled for the waiter. Breakfast is on the house, of course. Olivia chuckled, unfolding her napkin. Naturally. Across the restaurant, guests had begun to whisper. Some had watched the exchange. Some had merely sensed the tension. But Olivia didn't care. She had won. And Ethan, well, he had just learned the hard way that in her world, underestimating the wrong person could cost you everything. Ethan sat in the dimly lit back office, his head in his hands. The muffled sounds of the hotel lobby felt distant, like an echo of the world he was no longer a part of. It had happened so fast. One minute, he was in control, dictating who belonged and who didn't. The next, he was discarded like an afterthought. The same way he had dismissed Olivia the night before. He stared at the blank termination papers in front of him, fingers trembling. It wasn't just his job. His entire career had been built on the prestige of working at the Kensington Grand. Now, he was nobody. And it was because of her. Ethan clenched his jaw, resentment bubbling up in his chest. That woman, Olivia Carter, had played him without lifting a finger. He had misjudged her, and it had cost him everything. But as much as he wanted to blame her, deep down he knew the truth. This was his own fault, and there was no coming back from it. Meanwhile, across the hotel, Olivia leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee as she finalized the last details of her case with Henry Whitmore. The contract was ironclad, her legal strategy airtight. The Kensington Grand would be safe from litigation. For now. Are you certain you don't want to pursue legal action against him? Whitmore asked, studying her over the rim of his glass. Olivia smirked. No need. Whitmore arched a brow. No need? After what he pulled? She set down her coffee. Tell me something, Henry. What's worse, losing a lawsuit or losing everything you've worked for in a single moment? Whitmore let out a low chuckle. Fair point. Ethan's firing would follow him wherever he went. The hospitality industry was small and reputation was everything. The mark on his record would haunt him for years, if not forever. That was justice enough. And besides, Olivia had bigger things to focus on. She checked her watch. I should be heading out soon. Whitmore nodded, pushing back his chair. I'll walk you out. As they moved through the restaurant, heads turned. The staff, who had either witnessed last night's exchange or heard the whispers, watched her with newfound respect. The guests, curious about the woman who had forced a powerful hotel to correct its mistake, took notice. And Olivia? She walked with the same quiet confidence she had the night before. Only this time, the weight of expectation had shifted. She wasn't just another guest. She was a power player. They stepped into the lobby just as Ethan emerged from the back office, holding a single envelope. His official dismissal. His eyes met Olivia's across the room, and for a fleeting second, something passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. A silent acknowledgement of what had happened. Olivia didn't look away. She held his gaze, unflinching, until he was the one to turn away first. Good. She had made her point. Outside, her car was already waiting. The valet, who had seen the entire situation unfold, opened the door for her with a respectful nod. Have a wonderful day, Ms. Carter, he said, his tone sincere. She smiled. I always do. Sliding into the back seat, Olivia exhaled slowly, letting the satisfaction settle. She hadn't just won. She had changed something. And for her, that was the real victory. As the car pulled away from the Kensington Grand, Olivia turned her phone back on. A flood of emails and missed calls awaited her. clients, colleagues, a few congratulatory messages from people who had caught wind of what had happened. But one text stood out. "No number, respect, you handled that better than most." Olivia's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. It seemed even Ethan had learned something. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And with that, she put her phone away, leaned back, and let the city lights blur past. Tomorrow, there would be another fight, another case, another battle to win. But for now, she was exactly where she was meant to be.